The Liberal government has been trying to convince you that Donald Trump's tariffs were something that Canadians should take personally. I told you they were coming no matter what the Liberal government said to you. They have arrived, or they've started to arrive, and I'm going to show you how it has nothing to do with Canadian people. It has everything to do with Donald Trump keeping his word, and it also has a ripple of big business. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. President Trump announced that he was going to increase the tariffs on steel and aluminum coming into the United States of America. And the left is melting down. They're just freaking out. I'm going to get you. And it's like, you know what? It's not personal. You shouldn't be taking it personal. And rather than try to tell yourself that you're going to, start some war that Canada could never win, we should be worried about how we're going to get out of this mess. Of course, they're not worried about how they're going to get out of this mess. They already know they're in a mess. The economic decisions that they have made is what led us to this problem. The ideas behind the far left ideology has destroyed the economy of this country. It had nothing to do with COVID. It had everything to do with printing money like crazy people and telling ourselves that we don't need any other markets. We have America, so we don't need anything else. Unfortunately for Canadians, America is on the same continent, so they have many of the same products. And so what is happening is that Donald Trump is attempting to kickstart his entire economy, whereas our politicians have led us down this pathway of where we're going to be living in the dark ages like a bunch of serfs, and the elites will control all of the land while all of us are crammed into some little high density region. I'll just cover the tariffs in this one, though, it's an ongoing cultural situation, so we're going to have to talk about it more and more. Now, all of you know that I don't do well with gossip, and I don't do well with hysteria, because when there's a problem, it's the man that's keeping his head that gets you out of it, not the people that are overreacting. The Liberal Party is trying to angle this to make you think that by voting for them, you're going to somehow improve your situation. The people that got us into this mess cannot be the ones that get us out of this mess, or they would have avoided getting us into this mess in the first place. We'll cover that later. I went right to the source. So here's the fact sheet. President Donald J. Trump restores Section 232 tariffs. We can see by seeing Section 232 that this is already something that has passed through both the Senate and Congress and has been approved by the United States government, I believe, back in the 40s, if I remember right. Now, I'm not going to read everything to you, but there are some parts to it that are important. He's talking about the steel tariffs and how it's critical infrastructure. The countries of Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, the European Union, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom had received exemptions which prevented the tariff from being effective. The 25% tariff, but up to that point, had been 10%. By granting exemptions to certain countries, the United States inadvertently created loopholes that were exploited by China and others with excess steel and aluminum capacity, undermining the purposes of these exemptions. And what that meant was China takes their money and then they subsidize some of their industries so that they can give that industry to other countries. Like they say, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll give you a deal on steel. We'll sell it to you 20% cheaper than you can get it into the United States. Then you can turn around and just resell it to the United States at the 20% kick. In exchange, you have to let us come in and build your Wi-Fi network, or you have to let us come in and build all of your roads. You have to come in and let us have all access to all of your critical infrastructure so that we can keep tabs on you whenever we want. That's just the basics of it, which is what you hear them talking about in Panama, which is what you hear them talking about in much of Africa. That's what they mean by loopholes. So the president is exercising his authority under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 to adjust import steel and aluminum to protect our national security. So here we can see this is a policy the United States has had in place for, 50, 60 years anyway, right? Yeah, 60 years. Restoring fairness to steel and aluminum markets. President Trump is taking action to end unfair trade practices and global dumping of steel and aluminum. Now, you notice that Canada has only been mentioned one time along with 10 other countries. It's not personal. So stop thinking that it is, because it isn't. This goes on to talk about how they lost a bunch of money in 2000 22 and 23, the capacity utilization fell to 77% and 75% respectively. High volume from sources exempt from Section 232 tariffs are a major factor in the depression of domestic production volumes. Goes on to say a bunch of things that are really only interesting to statistics and accountants, which, you know, if you want, you can read it. I'll leave a link to this down in the description. Here's what is interesting. I told all of you, you'll remember, you can go back into my back catalog, that Pennsylvania, a swing state, gave all of their votes to the President Trump. And why is that relevant? Pennsylvania has a lot of steel mills in it. Now, when I say steel mill, you have to think of something that takes up, 3 or 4 football fields and has things that go down into the ground, 3 or 4 stories for starting fires. And it's all the stuff you've seen on TV. It's 1,500 guys working 3 shifts, people working 3 shifts, machinery and overhead cranes and heat and those thick gloves and all of that stuff. And I'll get into why this is important and why it's happening quicker than it is. But first, I want to dispel the myth that it's personal. It's not. The steel tariff that President Trump implemented led to thousands of jobs gained and higher wages in the metals industry. Studies have repeatedly shown that, contrary to public rhetoric, which is what we're getting from the Liberal Party, a lot of rhetoric, a lot of propaganda, no solutions, just chaos and hysteria, tariffs can be an effective tool for achieving economic and strategic objectives. Now, what I want to show you is the 2 things, the amount of countries that, and I'm going to explain the rest to you. At the bottom here, you can see a 2024 economic analysis found that a global tariff of 10% would grow the economy by $728 billion, create 2.8 million jobs, and increase real household incomes by 5.7%. Those numbers are enormous. He put a 25% tariff. And I'll tell you what the difference between this 10% and that 25% is. Though it's not, it's going to make him almost $1 trillion. That's great, right? That's fine. A lot of that's going to go into the company's pockets and will find its way into, less expensive products like stoves or cars or what have you. The 2.8 million jobs, though, now that's something that he is concerned about, which is something the Liberal government should be concerned about, but they're not. Mark Carney doesn't care about increasing the economy of Canada. He wants to destroy it so that he can turn it into his own private game reserve, like some sort of lord from, 600s England. And increase real household income by 5.7%. Now, when you consider that a lot of people get like a 1% raise annually, a 6% kick is a lot of money. And that's just what's coming into on the one side of it. So this is jobs, this is money, and that 5.7% then becomes what they can spend. That becomes the disposable income, which can now be spent on nail polish and hairdo and I don't know, whatever people buy. People buy stuff, right? You can buy stuff for the kids. You can put it away for college. You can improve your standard of living and become no longer lower middle class or lower class, poor. You can now move into the official middle class, which is to say that, yeah, okay, I'm still keeping track. I got a budget and all that stuff. But when I get home, everything is paid for. The lights are on. My children are clean and happy. Everything is good. And the worst thing I got to worry about is whether or not I want to pay that $50 for that field trip. All right, I appreciate that I said a lot there, and I'm going to tie it all together for you right now. Let me establish a couple of things. 2.8 million jobs is a lot of money generating the economy. That's an enormous number, 2.8 million. And when you factor in salaries, you're talking about serious GDP. Add to that 5% increase in people's household income. If you're a person sitting in downtown Toronto right now wondering if the government is ever going to start feeding your children lunch, and all of a sudden you get a job that brings 5 or 6% more money into your house, you don't have to sell out your dignity and your self-respect to wait for the government to give your children food. You can say, I don't need people to look after my family. I don't need people to look after my children. I have more money in my pocket. Which, of course, dignity, I mean, what kind of value can you put on dignity? What kind of value can you put on self-respect? So leave that aside, though, because what I want you to really look at is why this is happening right now. Now, I told you all that it was coming and there was nothing that we could do about it, and that the Canadian government was not following the right pathway to solve the problem for us Canadians. They just want to lay blame. They want to tell everybody it's not their fault. This is typical stuff. They've been doing it their whole entire tenure. Donald Trump said, okay, I'll give you a 30-day reprieve to fix the border. He said that to Mexico as well. Now he says, well, we're going to be looking at the steel tariffs. We're going to be looking at everything come April 1st. However, you're like, wait a minute, this is still February. What happened? I'll tell you what happened. To understand what happened, you must put into your mind that a steel company is a mining company, a company that owns a mine, that owns a steel mill or three, that owns the same company that will dig out tin, gold, aluminum, maybe diamonds in some cases, depending. Those companies are never individualized. It's not like this guy owns a steel mill like you would own a corner store or a gas station or, a fence building company. These are international corporations, conglomerates. They have a lot of moving parts and they have a lot of money. Donald Trump said to everybody, I'm going to give corporations 15% business tax. Compared to what Canada charges, that's basically a hit in the lottery. And remember, one of the reasons that all of these industries moved out of the United States was because they wanted to do it cheaper. They didn't do it because they think they're nice, warm, and fuzzy people. These are not political ideologues. They are people that are trying to do good in business. They are people that are trying to look good in their career, just like a professional athlete. And they are trying to get their bonuses. They need that extra money so that they can change their car from a Mercedes to a Lamborghini or whatever it is they do with themselves. What you and I need to understand is Donald Trump said he's going to give these companies this tax rate. Now, these companies all own land in Pennsylvania. They have steel mills that have been sitting there empty, not running for 20, 30, whatever it is, years. I mean, I think the first time I heard about it was Billy Joel's song Allentown. So what was that, the 70s? They have been moving this industry out slowly but surely. On top of that, our government has been pushing the green agenda, and we turned all of the steel mills in Canada into these electrification steel mills, which require enormous amounts of power and create some of the most expensive steel on the face of the earth. And Donald Trump said to you, Justin Trudeau said to you, don't worry about it. We're going to subsidize all these steel industries with Canadian tax dollars, just like they do with everything else, because they're socialists and they can't come up with a way to do it any differently. We're going to give you all the people's money and you're going to be able to sit around and everything will be fine and hunky-dory. However, those businessmen are not ideologues, like I mentioned. They're not stupid. So they sat down and they said to themselves, hey, wait a second. We can take the product out of Hamilton and out of Quebec, and we can make it in this plant that we've had running for whatever it is. Donald Trump will give that we've had empty for however long it is. Donald Trump will give us the money that give us a tax break. In addition to that, there might even be a few subsidies for the people that need to rebuild and refire it up. I mean, it's not like they can flick a switch and the thing turns back on like a light switch. There's a lot to go through. There's a lot of unpacking that has to happen. There's a lot of stuff that's underground in a steel mill. People don't appreciate that, but the ovens are in the ground. And many of them are like taller than a 3-story building, but deep, because that stuff, they need heat. Pressure creates heat. Anyway, the thing that what I'm trying to get you to understand is they feel that they are ready. So now they say to Donald Trump, because these are rich industrial people who steel and aluminum is in everything from cars to machine guns to houses, buildings, roadways, everything. And these guys can call up the White House, maybe not Donald Trump personally, though I'm sure Donald Trump being a billionaire, he probably knows a couple of them. And they said, you know what? It's better for us if you start this tariff right now. Because then we can go back to the Canadians with their ridiculous green and their ridiculous demands. And we can say, sorry, but it's cheaper and more effective and more efficient for us to take these products out of Hamilton or out of Quebec and move them down into Pennsylvania, where we will then be able to save a lot of money and make a lot of money, and we won't have to worry about your green initiatives, and we won't have to worry about your exorbitant tax rates, where we won't have to worry about any of the policies that you have put in place over the last number of years that are essentially making it impossible for us to get anything done. What everybody needs to hear is that Donald Trump has been saying this right out loud from the beginning, right? What is steel and aluminum used in primarily for Canada that we got to hear and think about right off the gate? Car parts. So now what will he do, right? Because they're not going to be ready to manufacture them as yet, but they need to get those steel mills up and running. And so now everybody that's going to continue to bring in steel until they are ready are going to be paying this 25% tariff. So that's money going directly into the coffers of the United States, which they can then turn around and pay down the debt, because that's what something that he's trying to do. None of this, of course, is personal towards Canada. Let's remember that. So what have our politicians done about it? They prorogued Parliament. They made it impossible for us to get anything done effectively with the voice of the people. They're talking about extending the election till many months from now, so we can't even get it solved. You think that Mark Carney, the guy who's so into turning Canada into this dystopian nightmare, is going to be able to negotiate with Donald Trump? Or do you think that he's going to say one thing to Donald Trump, because Mark Carney has a lot of businesses in China and a lot of businesses in the United States, right? Billions of dollars invested in both countries. Do you believe that he'll say one thing to one guy, Trump, and a different thing to us? Either way, if you believe that that's somebody that you want to trust with your vision, with your future, then I guess you're not thinking your way through your vote, in my opinion. But it's your vote. You can do with it what you like. If you want to waste it, go ahead. It's the policies of these people that have gotten us into this mess. If they didn't put these restrictions on the steel industry wouldn't just say, yeah, you know what, let's up and move back to the United States of America into buildings that are 50 years old, because we will make a lot of money. And that's what really matters, right? That's what they're doing. It's about the cash. And if Ford says to themselves, well, we can take 3 or 4 of these parts and send them over to Illinois, or we can send them over to Nevada, or we can send them to these different places instead of sending them back into Canada, then they will do that too. Because not only will they get the 15% tax rate, by opening a new place in Nevada, they'll still get that tax rate, which will still be cheaper than whatever they're paying in Oakville, one of the most expensive real estates on earth. It's more than just the tariffs, right? It's the business model that we have to consider, that we have to look at. And anybody with even the slightest understanding of economics can see this from a mile away. The Liberal government trying to convince you that they know what economics look like, but at the same time trying to tell you that this move by the United States is personal. There's a flag there. There's something there that is not adding up. Now, I know that this has gone on for a long time, but it's a complex situation. There's a lot of moving parts. What you, the electorate, the Canadian, have to understand is the pressure you need to be putting on the elected officials to call for Parliament to come back and have a new election. That's what Canada needs. We need somebody who understands that the vision for Canada is not about attacking the United States. It's not about some globalist opinion. It's about making sure that Canada comes first. It's about making sure that our people get fed by our people. It's about making sure that our industries get started by our people. It's about making sure that we develop a middle class. And why do I say it like that? Because that's when the corporations go away, was when the middle class comes. When the middle class is strong, the corporations are not. So we have a lot of things that we can be capitalizing on, because if the one thing that this lays bare is that the Canadian economy is far too invested in the American economy to survive on its own. And so every time that he initiates these tariffs, our Liberal government goes, oh no, he's a big mean meanie. Well, you know what? If you guys had a single clue about anything, you would know that we should have solved this problem. I think I've heard Pierre Poilievre talking about it since COVID. I mean, it's years the Conservatives have been saying something needs to be done. And here it is, come home to roost. And what's the Liberal government doing about it? They're trying to use words like war, like they would. Trudeau walks down the street surrounded by 15 RCMP officers and travels in a caravan of 10 cars. What would he understand about a fight? Anyway, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. Do you think that the Trump is doing this to get at us personally, or do you just think that the liberal government realizes now that their policies are horrible and they're trying to throw a red herring so that you don't blame them for what they're responsible for? Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time.